You know, everyone kept telling me in preparation for this episode that we have to ask John about him being in the CIA. John, let's talk about your background here, because I think this is what shapes a couple too, is like our histories that we bring forward, right?
It was a fascinating experience. I got to see different parts of the world.
But let me ask you a question when it comes to secrets, right? Like,
yeah.
Now, as a married person, do you feel like when you hear a secret, that also means that Allison is going to hear it? Because if someone tells me a secret, sorry friends who are listening, but I could swear up and down, my husband is going to learn about it like 9 out of 10 times. Welcome to the Ask a Matchmaker podcast. I'm your host, Matchmaker Maria, and we're still continuing on with these solo episodes. Summer, here we are, me and you. We're going to talk about dating. We're going to talk about relationships, but we actually do have guests this week. Here joining me this week is relationship coach Allison Raskin and her husband, John Blakeslee, an ex-CIA agent. My Jesus, we have the most diverse set of guests this past year, and I'm very, very proud of that. And they have a new podcast called Starter Marriage, and I'm just so excited to have them here. Welcome, welcome, Allison and John.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So let's, we got to get the fangirling out of the way. I'm a big fan of Allison. Allison wrote this incredible book last year called I Do, I Think. I purchased it on Audible, listened to it in like 48 hours the week it came out. And I absolutely loved it. I loved it enough to find her on Instagram and like start following her. And I just thought it was such a wonderful way of understanding how serious a decision like marriage is, and that there are different ways that we can get into that sort of partnership and our expectations of them and the kind of questions we have to ask. So now that I have Allison here, I do want to talk about that for just a moment, John, even though I feel like I know you because she talked a lot about you too in the book.
I'm also a huge fan of Allison, so I'd be curious to hear what her thoughts are.
And go ahead, Allison. So tell us, if it's okay with you, in your book, I Do, I Think, how have the conversations around marriage changed for you as a relationship coach since that book came out?
Oh, I only launched my relationship coaching business after the book came out. So I've only been seeing clients since November, and the book came out in October. So I think by the time people sort of were finding me for that, they had this idea that I'm not someone that is like, we have to get married at all costs, or like marriage has to look a specific way. I think, my niche sort of in this space is really the relationship between mental health and romantic relationships and how the two interplay and impact each other. And I think what's really exciting about this moment in modern marriage is that we don't need it, right? It is just simply no longer a social necessity in the way that it used to be, which means it gets to be a choice, and not just a choice of if you do it, but how you want to do it. And that was really exciting in researching the book, of just like all the different ways marriage can look, and also just my understanding of like what a successful marriage is. And I think for me growing up, it was like, well, if you're not married until death, then you fucked up. Oh, am I allowed to curse? I'm sorry.
You're totally allowed to curse.
If you're not married until death, then you really screwed up. But now I really think that marriages don't have to last your entire life to be additive, to be successful, to have been an important part of your journey. And that shift, I think, has like really impacted my work as a relationship coach as well.
Do you ever work with people who are trying to navigate co-parenting?
I have not worked with any people who are divorced yet. So I either work with couples who are still together, or a lot of individuals who are figuring out if they're in the right relationship, or maybe how to navigate their way out of that relationship. But I haven't tackled the co-parenting at all yet.
I find this part really fascinating because as I mentioned to you right before we started recording, your book came into my hands right after I sent the final manuscript to my publisher. Ask a Matchmaker, y'all. If you haven't bought it yet, what's going on? Come on. And there was a point where I read your book and I thought, man, I would have loved to have like cited her book at this, like quite literally in chapter 1, because, I kind of established in the book, dating is a privilege, and marriage used to be a tool and it was not necessarily a happy tool. It was a tool for survival. And I think in your book, you like that one sentence that I said, you wrote like 3 chapters on. And I just thought that was really, I was just like, yes, I really like this book. And then 6 months later, you come out with another book. Like I remember like rubbing my eyes. I was like, didn't she just have a book come out? How is there another book? But this one is fiction, the book that just came out.
Yeah, I had my first rom-com novel come out in April called Save the Date, and that was a roller coaster of 6 months of like being like, I know I just begged all of you to purchase one of my books, but let me beg you again so soon.
You feeling it? All right. So now let's talk about your new podcast, Starter Marriage. I feel like the title is perfect. Let's talk about why we're starting Starter Marriage.
Do you want to take it, John? I've been.
No, I think it would be more appropriate for you to talk because it came off the heels of I Do, I think. And so Allison, there was interest in turning that book that you read, Maria, into a podcast. And then I assumed when Allison was shopping a podcast, that it was going to be one of her many, part of the Allison Raskin empire of podcasts and books and YouTube videos. But then she wrote me into it. And so I was a little hesitant at first because Allison shares her most intimate, deep thoughts on the internet for people at her Substack or on her podcasts. And I do not do that. I keep my most intimate thoughts buried deep within the cockles of my heart. But I thought it would be an interesting experiment to have messy conversations about what it means to be in this institution. And with Allison, who, we can have these tough talks with a lot of humor and insight, hopefully. Just have conversations that I wasn't really hearing people have, certainly in a public setting, but having them a lot in private settings or having them with their friends. And so getting that out there, it did appeal to the writer, the artist in me. So it's been a really interesting ride.
Well, let me ask you some like foundational questions here. Like, how long have you been married?
Well, I've been married 2 years in August.
Yeah.
2 years in August. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And correct me if I'm wrong, but is your opinion that when you get married, things change, or does it not really change?
So this is an interesting conversation that we've had where John didn't really see that much value in marriage when we met. He thought it was sort of just something you would do if you were planning to have kids to kind of like give a family structure to like the unit. And I was someone who really wanted to be married my whole life. I think my parents had a very strong marriage. I also grew up with a lot of like mental health struggles. I've had OCD since I was 4 years old. And there was always this element of like, I need a buddy. I need to prove that like, I'm not like unlovable, all these things that I unpack a lot in my other book, Overthinking About You. And so I really valued marriage. And for me, it really was as someone who's had many relationships and a broken engagement, it was really a way to like feel like there was another level of like commitment and like dependence that like, the things that I could ask of a husband were maybe things I couldn't necessarily ask of a partner. Again, that's a personal belief that's like based on my own upbringing and my own issues. A lot of people do not feel that way and have the same level of connection and interdependence through just, partnership without the marriage piece. But for me, that piece was really important. And then I think once we got married, that piece kind of clicked in for John too, in a way that I believe kind of surprised him.
Yeah. Well, like Allison said, to me, I was like, well, if we're not sure we're going to have kids, what is the point of this? For me, it's like providing a safety structure to a child to let them know that like mom and dad aren't going anywhere. But what was interesting was that Allison also said very pithily that having a husband meant she could treat me like family, that it wasn't just a boyfriend, but that like she could ask things of me that she could only ask of a family member.
Give me an example.
And yeah, so the first year of our marriage was the worst year of our lives, both of us. It was a nightmare. One thing after the next went wrong, and in some case it was comically wrong and small.
Like with your marriage, like in communication, or were like things happening, like your house burned down?
Things happening. So, Allison's mother came down with a very sudden, tragic neurodegenerative disease out of nowhere, and she died within 6 weeks of us showing up to New York. And during that time, I think there was a comfort with me to care for her mom because I was her son-in-law. I was not just a guy that, long-term boyfriend. And again, I'm sure plenty of people are able to do these types of things, but for Allison and I think Allison's family, it made a substantial difference in kind that I was legally part of this family. And a point that I make on the podcast is that one thing that has surprised me about marriage is that marriage is not just about the people who stand up at the altar and say, I do. It actually creates a web of relationships. Suddenly, I'm not just a husband, I'm also a son-in-law. And I have a brother-in-law and a sister-in-law, and Allison has that. And it's sudden. I'm Uncle John overnight. And it creates this web of human connection that deepens in these really profound ways. And suddenly, I have responsibility to this group of people, this clan. And I was not expecting that.
I think what you both just shared, and my deepest condolences, Allison. I was following that online as it was happening, and you were quite vulnerable with your audience too in sharing that at the time as well, and you continue to. I mean, grief is something that stays with us. But I think, John, what you just said, I think is so paramount to the naysayers, and it's really hard, I think, sometimes for people who have not been married, who believe in just like civil partnership, which is fine. It's okay to do that. But I think sometimes there is this sort of competitiveness of like, well, it's the same. And it's like, well, it's kind of not, in the sense that there is also this sort of binding contract of expectations of, your end of the deal. And I think it does go also into the mindset. I just want to add on to what you said. I've been married for long enough for me not to be able to do quick math. Oh, it's going to be 10 years in December. Like our legal wedding. We had our big fat Greek wedding in Greece the following year. So it's 9 years according to the Greek government. Anyway. And I just remember, I don't think our behavior changed with each other as much as there was this sort of like, yeah, I'm in this space. Like it's so funny that you mentioned like you're being someone's brother-in-law, because the first memory I have after, the priest pronounced us husband and wife is my sister just coming up to the altar, crying, just like a complete mess, and saying, "You're my brother." And I just always think about that all the time, like how everyone's behavior changes based on like who you choose here. And, I think sometimes when people are in these really long civil partnerships, which is fine. Again, no one has to get married. But there is this sort of like, oh, that's my aunt's partner. Like, and it just kind of makes you ask more questions than not. But maybe that's what we do need is more questions. Well, I want to learn a little bit more about then starter marriage. Like what will we be tackling in starter marriage? Is it going to be like, you mentioned something about the questions that we don't ask ourselves ahead of time. Can you give me an idea of what we would expect tuning into the podcast?
Yeah.
And also, is the podcast only for married people, or can people that are like single or in relationships listen to it? And should they listen to it with their partner?
Some of my favorite comments have been, I have no plans to get married. I'm going to listen to this every week, which I think is so kind. Because it's also, there is a sociological element to the show. I mean, we're examining this institution that impacts all of us, whether or not we are actively married or looking to be married, because society is built around this relationship, right? Like, people that get married get all of these benefits, both like tax benefits and also just like, societal benefits of this sense of like, I've done it, I'm an adult, like, look at me, I was able to throw this big wedding. It's just very insidious in like all parts of our lives. And so I think the show ideally appeals to kind of like anyone interested in human nature and relationships and, sociology. And then also, there's also the elements of like, it's a relationship, right? And so whether or not you're married, you're maybe learning things about life partnership, commitment, navigating, sharing your life with another person, whether or not you decide to get married. But we're really kind of examining modern marriage from every angle. So we're going to have a really wonderful historian on the show to sort of talk about the evolution of marriage, which we were alluding to earlier in this episode. We had an episode about being an interfaith relationship and how we navigate that. We're going to have someone on talking all about, non-monogamy and the different structures that marriages can take. So it's really like every aspect. Finances, we're going to have, because I think the question of like, do we join finances? Do we not? What does it mean to like, that honestly is like in many ways the biggest leap that you're taking when you get married, is you're financially connected to this person in a way that you're not when you're just cohabitating. And so how do you talk about money, which is like so deeply difficult.
I specifically remember that chapter in your book too. And I remember thinking like, man, there's so many people who don't know the laws in their own states. Like, I'll hear from people like, well, we have separate accounts. And I'm like, yeah, but if you're residents of this state, it doesn't matter that you have separate, everything can change overnight. I would love to hear more about, if you're looking for segment ideas, episode ideas. I'm seeing right now with Gen Z, this sort of, they're really conservative, huh? This sort of pullback to like more traditional, I don't want to say trad wife content, but it seems like that's very appealing to them to kind of like go.
We are going to have an episode about trad wives.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. And then I'd love to hear more about like, stay-at-home mom structures, because I'm not a stay-at-home mom. I don't have that many friends. I only have 2 friends that are, and I always have more questions for them than they are able or willing to give me answers to. So I can't wait to listen to your podcast. All right, so let's learn more about both of you now. So, everyone kept telling me in preparation for this episode that we have to ask John about him being in the CIA. John, let's talk about your background here, because I think this is what shapes a couple too, is like our histories that we bring forward, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I was an officer in the Central Intelligence Agency for approximately 4 years in total, and it was a fascinating experience. I got to see different parts of the world. I got to work on interesting projects. But ultimately, I decided it wasn't something I wanted to do long term for a variety of reasons. And I left and I moved to California, where I became a screenwriter for about the past 10 years. Been working in television. And so it's kind of like a wild ride, both a career centered around secrecy and maintaining a cover, with now, especially with this podcast, a career, or first a career around fictionalizing some of that and thinking through what it means to live a life in secrets. And now the fiction has kind of been removed, and I'm just directly talking about my marriage. and about my past and who I am. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely in me, secrets are, whether it be that career or even just in general in my life, I think is a way for a lot of people to protect themselves.
But let me ask you a question when it comes to secrets, right? Like,
yeah.
Now, as a married person,
Mm-hmm.
do you feel like when you hear a secret, that also means that Allison is going to hear it? Because if someone tells me a secret, like sorry, friends who are listening, but I could swear up and down, my husband is going to learn about it like 9 out of 10 times.
It is context dependent for me. And so I think probably Allison knows most things for sure. But look, if a friend came to me and said, I can only tell you this, and it's not relevant to Allison, I would take that into consideration. I think another thing about being married is that the person you're married to, your primary partner, is not in my opinion, your end all and be all for everything. I love Allison. I adore her with every bit of my heart. But there are other relationships that people have. There are friendships. There are mentorships. And those are important too. And they come with a certain level of trust and with their own set of terms. Now, my relationship with Allison is my most important relationship. And if those relationships threatened my dyad with Allison, that would be a problem. And if what was being disclosed to me was somehow threaten my relationship with Allison, that would be a problem. But I have to navigate that. And there have been moments in the past where I've said to Allison, yeah, like I'm having a talk with one of my friends, and I can't tell you about it. And I would be okay with that if Allison had to do that too. It doesn't have anything to do with you. It doesn't have anything to do with me, but I need to be there for a friend. And I think that is a fair and healthy way of viewing things instead of this one person is your everything.
I love that. How do you balance now with this podcast, the need for privacy with sharing your marriage story so openly?
Therapy.
Really? You go to therapy? Couples therapy?
No,
Okay.
No, personal therapy. No, I'll let Allison, jump in here. But no, it's definitely been interesting for me, especially because this is Allison's career. I do other things, and so some people in my other life have listened to the podcast where we're sharing like very intimate details about our marriage and about my life, details that I would not normally volunteer. And so, yeah, it's been an interesting way of navigating the world. Also, it's so interesting because we're having intimate conversations that give people a snapshot of what our marriage is. And I have found that interesting. Like people who haven't like really met Allison have an impression of her from this podcast that is partially true, but not is such as it's a parasocial.
Yeah,
exactly. And so their view of my marriage is also like shaped by this podcast. That isn't totally true. And so navigating, I mean, Allison is such a pro at this and has been doing this for years. And so I lean on her. But it is an interesting thing to navigate for sure. I mean, what do you think, honey?
Well, now I'm wondering what people's opinions are of me that have just listened to the podcast.
I mean, I'll give you an opinion. I think you guys are really solid, and I think it, from the outside perspective, it seemed like you, Allison, went through a lot of grief this past year, and that your partner was your rock, like really showed up. And like, I think that's the hope for anyone, that's in that. And if it's okay, I'd like to just share here, like, it's almost kind of grief, but my mom became like really disabled in 2020, at the end of 2020. And I've been on my caregiving journey with her, and that's actually changed my marriage with my husband the last 5 years substantially.
Yeah.
And I think he's come on the podcast maybe like 2 times to talk about it, where it was like, how your partner shows up in that, because that is, it's almost a form of grief at certain points, because I don't have the same parent. My kids don't have the same grandparent that I had dreamt for them. And I certainly don't have the same parent. I have a person that is 100% dependent on myself and my father, but also how like our marriage changed, even how we became intimate. If I was really overwhelmed with my mom, there was just no intimacy that could happen. I was just so emotionally spent. And I would assume it would be the same case when you're, grieving your own mother that you loved so very much.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think as my mother was dying, she took a lot of solace in the fact that I had John. I think that if this had happened before we met, my mom would have been a lot more worried about me than she was, because of the fact that I was in such a good and strong marriage. Kind of returning back to the question around, what do we share, what do we not? I could think of like 3 pretty major things that impact our lives and our family dynamics, and things that we've never talked about publicly, or not shared extensively about publicly. And so, there's sort of just an understanding that for now, those things are off the table. And if at some point we make the joint decision to start to share, we would. But, the thing is, it's not just about us, right? There's other people that the things that impact us. It's not just like me and you, it's like other family members, other people in our orbit, and so that's something I've had to toe the line with, like my whole career, is like, it's one thing for me to share about me. It's another thing for me to share someone else's stuff. And so being really, cognizant of that. And so I think that there is, an understanding with my audience that I'm choosing what I show you, what I'm choosing to share. I don't filter to the way I think some other people do. Like I show you the bad stuff. I show you the good stuff. I show you, like the sides of me that I'm maybe not so happy or impressed with, but there are certain elements that I can't really go into. And I think that luckily, the audience that I have and that we're building, have understand the nuance of what it is to be a person who also shares online.
I love that. All right. So before we wrap up, I want for each of you to hype up your co-host, because at the end of the day, we want people to listen to Starter Marriage, which, by the way, I always thought Starter Marriage meant your first marriage before you go to a regular marriage.
It's tongue in cheek. It's a tongue.
I love it.
Yeah, because the idea is that it's our first attempt at marriage, and so we're doing our best.
Have you seen?
Hopefully, our last, but
Have you seen that trend with? Okay, so let me show you. Let me talk to my current husband.
Yeah,
have you seen that trend on TikTok?
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. All right, so John, why don't you go first? Hype up Allison on why she's your best co-host for your latest project.
Wow. My best co-host on my latest project, and certainly my co-host in life, not to be a little corny, but Allison is a rare person. She combines an extreme wit. I mean, a commenter recently described her as unbearably funny, which I think is quite true, with a sharp intelligence. With a real insight into people and an honesty about her own history and failings. And then also provides me the space to also delve into my thoughts and feelings. And so she is a safe harbor for me and for, I think, our listenership, where we can all sort of laugh, maybe sometimes cry together. And this podcast has enriched my life and marriage through being able just to spend 45 minutes talking with this brilliant woman. So
I love that. Also, she has killer bangs. You forgot to say
She really does. And if you've seen those nails, I mean, this is a podcast, but
let me see your nails.
Damn, girl.
Thank you,
Oh,
honey.
those are nice nails. Those are
He
nice.
did say to me once, he was like, "It is weird to me how much you think about your nails." And I was like, I know.
My husband has never said that, but yesterday I did ask him for his advice because the woman painted my nails white when I wasn't looking.
Oh,
I know
no.
that sounds really weird, but I was like really distracted by some episode of Chopped. I never watched regular TV, so it was on, so I was not watching her. And then I looked down, I'm like, oh, it's white. Okay, whatever. So I did ask my husband
for the summer.
I'm going to go back to light pink. I like a light pink chrome, All right, Allison, it's your turn. Why is John your best co-host?
Well, I'm going to get in trouble because I've had another co-host for the last 10 years. But John is. I have another podcast with a different co-host who's very jealous of the fact that I married someone that's not him. But no, John is my best co-host because he's one of the smartest, most articulate, charming people I've ever met. You could put him in a room with just about anybody and they would walk away being like, I love that guy, which is not a quality I've had throughout my life. And he's just very thoughtful and incredibly good at distilling complex ideas into like understandable takeaways. I think he adds a thoughtfulness to the podcast. And I also think because he hasn't, come up on the internet the same way I have with like YouTube and social media and all those things, he allows for much more space and a pace that is not like feeling like, oh, I just got to get to my point. Like he really allows to like bring the people in on his journey of thought that I think really like people find very relatable, of like it's not just like, let me just say this to say it. It's like you're really seeing his thought process and you're understanding where he is coming from. And I also just think that there's something really powerful about a straight man talking so openly about his feelings and about his mental health and about his struggles and even just the things that like, the stuff that he's trying to unlearn. And that I think is like such a great role model for everybody.
I was going to say, like, I think that I generally do hope that more men listen to podcasts like yours or even mine, because I think a big key in this quote unquote male loneliness epidemic is like there is a subset of the population that either doesn't want to experience being vulnerable or has never learned how to. And I do think that the solution to that is listening to other men who can exhibit those traits, and also perhaps reading books of fiction written by women. So in this case, it's 2-for-1 deal. I say the reason why I say reading fiction books written by women is because you get the female gaze and from a different perspective, and you get to be in someone else's shoes. So in this case, Allison, her latest book, Save the Date, John, former CIA agent, podcast host. I mean, really, this is he's probably still in the CIA. This is a really good cover for him. I could see the movie. Allison, this could be your next book, right? Like
we would have a big problem if he was still in the CIA.
It's very, it's almost very like, what's it called? Like John Grisham-esque, He's not a lawyer. He's a screenplay writer / podcast host. Anyway, well, John and Allison and John, it was really great having you on this week for the Ask a Matchmaker podcast. I do hope my listeners check it out. And I will include in the show notes a link for people to follow your podcast and, of course, follow you. Anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I think that, I just think it's so important to these conversations just about what the realities of relationships are. And so I'm really thankful to you that you're kind of taking away the curtain to look at what it really looks like rather than just the razzle dazzle Hollywood version.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Well, that's it for this week's Ask a Matchmaker podcast. I'm just so happy to be spending these solo episodes talking to interesting people who believe in love and who believe in relationships. I'm excited to listen to Allison and John's new podcast. I'm also excited to hear from you in the upcoming weeks. We're going to do a few hotline episodes, so be sure to follow me on Instagram at Matchmaker Maria so that you know when I am going to have live hotline recordings so that you can call in to get those questions answered. Well, that's it for this week. Be lovable, but more importantly, be likable. See you next week.